Welcome, friends, to Breakfast in the Ruins, a Michael Moorcock flavoured podcast. On this show, Miles is back, as we look at one of the few remaining bits of classic 60s Moorcock that, over 120 plus episodes in, we've somehow managed not to get to yet. We're reading The Ice Schooner. First published as a three-part serial in SF Impulse between November 1966 and January 1967, it was published as a novel in 1969, and, as with many of Mike's books, it underwent many revisions over the years. Joseph Conrad's novel, The Rescue, was a big inspiration, and Mike talked a little bit about his inspirations and intentions to Colin Greenland in Death is No Obstacle, where he said, "What I particularly wanted to learn was how to embody moral principles in characters who were human beings, not merely functional representations of good and evil, and not only to embody them, but also to demonstrate those principles in action, which is what Conrad is good at. From Conrad, you can really learn how to bring together the moral point, the crucial symbol, the plot development, and the revelation of character, all at the same time when the natives are attacking the stockade, or whatever." The Ice Schooner was where I began to describe ambiguities of character rather than society, and to allow each side of an argument to have its appeal. I'd done it in the final programme, but in a very sensational, jazzy way. Going back to conventional methods with the Ice Schooner, I learned a certain amount of subtlety. The possible readings of the Ice Schooner are subtler than they are in the Elric stories that preceded them only 3 years before. Now, this is a book I haven't read since the 1980s, so my memories of it are dim at best. Therefore, I was very much looking forward to revisiting it. And, as it happens, Miles was in a similar space. And obviously, because it's Miles, we talk about Star Trek and Doctor Who a bit too. So, unstrap your whalebone skis and sit by the fire with a particularly bitter brew, and join us as we board Michael Moorcock's The Ice Schooner. Welcome back, Miles. We're back in Derry Toms.
Always a pleasure to be back.
Yeah, and we've started a little bit late because you were doing some godly domestic tasks, which I wouldn't raise, but when you messaged me and said that you were doing your domestic tasks, I was just about to open my first beer of the evening. Now, two things to point out. One is you were doing domestic chores, and It's morning for you. What's it, 10:15 or something?
20 past 11.
20 past... Oh, okay, so...
The clocks just went back last night.
Yeah, so we did last weekend, I think.
Yeah.
But let's just pretend it is still breakfast time, because by some weird coincidence, my first beer that I've opened already is Siren Craft Brew Recurring Dream Breakfast Stout.
Ooh.
And let's have a look. Recurring Dream is a very special session strength edition of our flagship breakfast stout, Broken Dream. It features the same indulgence of chocolate flavours and specialty malts, along with the creaminess of lactose for balance and mouthfeel. Mouthfeel? What the fuck are they talking about? It's a bit poncy, that, for beer, isn't it? And coffee roasted by London's Climpson & Sons adds rich undertones of espresso. Ooh. So there we go. That is... I don't know why I thought that had some kind of... For some reason, I thought it said domestic somewhere on the label. Right, so when I said that there was some kind of synchronicity to you doing domestic chores while I was opening my beer, that turned out to be a falsehood. Because I totally misread my beer. Unless it's one of my other ones. Hang on a minute. Because I've got my backup beer here as well. Naughty and Nice double coconut macaroon chocolate. No, it's not that either. Right, obviously I misread something. Anyway.
Are you sure it's your first beer of the day, Andy?
It is not my first beer of the day, but I have had some codeine, so who knows where all this could go. Right, let me take my glasses off again. So, what's going on with Casual Trek, Miles Riedelbatter? Because if you are, of course, the co-host of the Casual Trek podcast.
Last week we just released our Halloween episode, which allowed us to talk about the episode of the original Trek where everyone suspects that Scotty might be Jack the Ripper, and they have a proper honest-to-God seance in class, and it's, and yeah, sometimes when it comes to looking for the Halloween kind of themed ones, it gets a bit difficult because it's Star Trek, so it never tends to go full spooky. So we also had the episode of Voyager where the Doctor just starts messing around with personality settings by taking famous figures and taking parts of their personality and adding them to his own, and never stops to think, maybe I shouldn't add large parts of Lord Byron into my personality, and he kind of goes all Jekyll and Hyde.
I do remember the Scotty Jack the Ripper episode, but only dimly. I probably haven't watched it for many, many, many years. How did they get to that point without a holodeck?
Where they're at a kind of just on a planet where, there's a lot of kind of free love and belly dancing. It's basically the Soho of space. And so right. we think that, there's a specific reason why Kirk and McCoy, especially McCoy, feel that they have to get Scotty on the pull. Something to do with a workplace incident which may have given Scotty a pathological hatred of all women. And we just think that McCoy was just really horny and just came up with the most bullshit excuse to justify taking Scotty and Kirk to, the sleaziest planet they could.
Yeah. I think Scotty is as close as you're probably going to get to a Moorcock character on Star Trek. Extremely competent. Everybody thinks he's cool to a degree. He likes a good drink, but he's a fucking duffer with the ladies. Yeah, I think he's probably pretty close. Shatner, Kirk, way too slick with the ladies to be an eternal champion. Way too slick.
I have to disagree, because there is that aspect of the whole Kirk is this killer ladies man is really just kind of like the pop cultural image of Kirk, whereas the Kirk of the very early Star Trek is very much is very much a repressed nerd who just who just pulls a lot of ladies. Meanwhile, Picard was the ultimate sleazy lady killer who then grew up to be the most British Frenchman in space.
Yeah, well, let's not get into the arc of Picard and what a mess he turned into by the time of the movies and things like that. Anyway.
But the most enjoyable part is the guy who does turn out to be the killer and possessed by the ghost of Jack the Ripper was also the voice of Piglet from the Disney Winnie the Pooh cartoons, and it's the same voice. So if you ever want to hear what it would sound like when Piglet just has enough of Tigger's bullshit, that's the episode of Star Trek for you.
I've got to dig that out. I've got the original series on Blu-ray somewhere, and I'm sure it's on one of the streaming services, but I do have all the Blu-rays in a pile somewhere. What's that episode called?
Wolf in the Fold.
Wolf in the Fold. Oh, I'm going to dig that one out and watch it.
It's series 2.
Well, kind of the sweet spot in many ways.
Yeah.
Yeah, original series. Now, I was thinking earlier, after you suggested we probably couldn't tie this episode into Doctor Who or The Coming of the Terror Files. By the way, we are going to be talking about the Ice Schooner before long. You said we probably couldn't tie this into Doctor Who or The Coming of the Terror Files to make sure that this didn't end up being The Coming of the Terror Files Part 7. And you're right. But after the debacle that was the end of the last series, it has been announced over the last day or two before we've recorded that the BBC have announced that the arrangement with Disney Plus is over, but nevertheless there will be a Christmas special in 2026, which is nice because there was lots of speculation, wasn't there, that Doctor Who would go on a hiatus for 10 years. But no, there's going to be a Christmas special in 26, which is nice, but also that Russell T Davies will write it, which I'm not sure about.
I've had to do a lot of soul searching with this most recent iteration of Doctor Who, and
because it all ended after we finished. We talked about Shooter Gatwa on Coming of the Terror Files episodes, but it's all ended since we finished those episodes, hasn't it?
It's all ended, and it's just it's definitely a mess. But it's a shame because a lot of the individual episodes which weren't the arc were pretty good. And I think it's one of those problems with a lot of the kind of when you have this kind of condensed Netflix format is that the season itself kind of lives or dies based on the quality of the finale. And that would just be like judging, say, Peter Davidson's last season of Doctor Who because the last episode of his season is actually Colin Baker's first, The Twin Dilemma, which is hilarious to watch, but good television it is not.
If only we could judge all of Peter Davison's stories on the Caves of Androzani. Unfortunately, we can't, can we?
No, and I feel like the hallmark of Peter Davison is the Black Guardian trilogy, which is, I feel, when Doctor Who tries to kind of emulate the grittiness of Alien after Earthshock did really well, I just don't kind of like it, because it's basically Marines in Blake 7 helmets with the faceplates cut off, running up and down spaceship sets, and I just kind of like, I just love the weirdness of Terminus with a leper colony in space, or Enlightenment when it's just like all these eternal beings doing a sailing ship race in space.
Yeah. I mean, I'll never hear a word against Earthshock for two reasons. One is people stepping in the goo that was somebody else only 10 minutes earlier, and the other is casting Beryl Reid as a starship captain.
Beryl Reid as a starship captain is a fantastic choice. I won't hear a bad thing about it.
Absolutely.
But it's one of those stories where I think the fact that Adric dies at the end makes everyone bump it up another 5-6 points of quality and not judge it, because the first half of the story, pretty good. The second half, which unfortunately is the Beryl Reid heavy part, kind of goes a bit downhill, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think I'm probably viewing that with rose-tinted glasses, because it's a long time since I've seen it. I've watched it since I got the DVD about 10 years ago, I think. Maybe how long have they've been releasing the DVDs? Probably 20 years, haven't they? So it's maybe 15, 20 years since I watched Earthshock, probably. And I'll view it through rose-tinted glasses for a couple... Well, I've mentioned two of the reasons. The sheer horror of that first episode is really effective, even now. Beryl Reid, fucking fantastic. And the other is not calling it something of the Cybermen, and the reveal of the Cybermen at the end of the first episode being a genuine surprise. You'd never get that in a million years anymore, because as you've mentioned, compressed seasons, that the advertise everything, from the rooftop. So I remember watching that as a kid, and it was a genuine surprise, because the Cybermen hadn't been seen since Revenge of the Cybermen with Tom Baker, something like 6 years before. So it was a huge surprise. Yeah, it was brilliant.
The novelization is pretty good. It's not done by Terrence Dicks. It's done by Ian Marter, who played Harry Sullivan. And the audiobook is read by Peter Davidson.
Ah, cool. I didn't realise Ian Marter did the novelisation of Earthshock. I mean, I must have had it at the time.
He did a few. He did The Invasion. He did the Sontaran Experiment.
Didn't he do a spin-off about Harry Sullivan as well?
He did do Harry Sullivan's War.
Never did read that.
No, and he also did The Ark in Space, which ups the body horror aspect of the Wirren by tenfold, because there's a lot of just kind of heads growing out of bodies. Ooh. Like it takes it definitely ups the gloopy gloppy factor of the bubble wrap creatures.
I've resisted. You know how it is. You get rid of all these things when you're a teenager, don't you? I mean, I got rid of all my Target books and flogged them to a shop in Hull called Hull Special FX, and he saw me coming a mile off and gave me a pittance for them, something like 40 or 50 Target books, just so I could buy the AD&D Player's Handbook. But one thing I have resisted is rebuying Target Doctor Who books. But I am curious about reading a couple of the Ian Marter ones, because apparently he was very good, wasn't he?
He was, yeah.
Shame that, because he also died very early, didn't he? Which is a real shame.
Yeah, I think he died in his 40s, but thankfully, they've been releasing them as audiobooks, so I just usually get them every couple of months with my Audible credits.
Yeah.
And they generally do like a very good job. Some are read by Tom Baker, who, early on, so he's in full Tom Baker gloriousness. Some have John Coleshaw from Dead Ringers, doing some of them, so he could do all the voices, and
got to check some of those out. And of course, the other thing they've committed to is they say there is going to be another series in 2027, which is interesting. So Russell T Davies will be writing the Christmas special, but we don't really know what's going to happen with this new series.
No. I've heard rumors that this might be his last one, which might honestly be for the best, because
I think so. Yeah.
I feel like my biggest problem with his returning to the show is that he seems to kind of forget that it's not 2005, because that first season with Christopher Eccleston, I honestly think they went into this thinking, okay, this is going to flop hard. But if it flops, we would have shot our shot. And then the show was like a smash cultural sensation. And I feel like the show became trapped in its own success almost immediately. And as much as I do enjoy the modern era, there is that feeling of, okay, are you a scrappy SF underdog, or are you the big Saturday evening like family event show?
Yeah.
Because then you kind of have to compromise.
Yeah.
And I feel there's a lot in that first season which has that feel of, we're never going to be able to kind of push it this far again.
Yeah, I think you've hit the nail on the head there. I think when he came back, the 3 Tennant episodes aside, which I thought were very good, and the odd episode here and there, I think he was too high in his own farts, frankly. I think the power got to his head, and all this stuff about bringing back old adversaries and turning them into CGI messes because he had the money to do CGI messes. It was really bad. What would you do with 2027 series? I mean, you've written Who fiction. What would you do with it?
What would me, a Doctor Who obsessive since 1993? I mean, oh god, that's the question every Who fan every Who fan who's ever written fan fiction has ever given thought about. Part of me would just kind of go, okay, let's do Unit Exile 2.0 and have him properly stuck on Earth, because I have a soft spot for Unit when they're a bunch of eccentric squaddies operating out of a shack somewhere in the North Countries.
Yeah.
Oh, honestly, just kind of, it's difficult because it's kind of like you would want to cherry pick from different from like the eras you like of the show.
Yeah.
So like a little bit of Unit here, a little bit of early Davidson, a little bit of the late Sylvester McCoy era. So like stuff like Ghostlight and The Greatest Show in the Galaxy, and be a much stranger show. Because I feel like also, I feel like generally audiences are a lot savvier to a lot of the stranger aspects of science fiction these days in TV, because we've had shows like Lost, like Battlestar Galactica, Stranger Things, The Witcher, that you don't have to keep it so contained to this is a character drama set in the modern day. The one thing I would get rid of would be like having the Buffy format of like having a big bad. Yeah. And have all your kind of plot lines be sort of more either thematic or kind of character based. Because when you have the Doctor essentially having to save the universe at the end of every season, you do have that problem, which you kind of get with Moorcock when he's doing the big cosmic stuff. It's like, how do you top it, and still get to maintain that kind of that feeling of it being completely relatable and not just, oh, we're going full cosmic universes, ancient gods, parallel cross-jumping, reality rewriting.
It's too much.
It gets too much. It's the same problem you have with like the Marvel films, in which you keep feeling you have to escalate the stakes instead of escalating the drama for the characters. The main thing I would do is not have the Doctor be this last of the Time Lord's godlike figure. I would definitely have him be like this crazed klepto, which the William Hartnell Doctor clearly is, because the moment the William Hartnell Doctor sees anything he wants, he's promptly going to nick it, and will take no guff about it.
Yeah. One thing it absolutely has to stop doing is trying to compete with the big stuff, and it started to try and compete with itself, which was the most self-destructive thing, I think. So stop trying to compete with everything, lower the stakes. I would even go back to, they've been doing short-form storytelling in that they've mostly done isolated one-off episodes that last about 45 to 50 minutes. One thing that is becoming an increasing trend on some streaming services is the 30-minute episode. So if you've only got enough money to do 10 episodes, do 4 30-minute Four stories of 4 30-minute episodes and bring cliffhangers back, keep the stakes low, and have the Doctor, number one, not have a sonic screwdriver, which explains why they can figure everything out. Have them be smart, odd, and rebuild the character from scratch. That's what I want to do.
I definitely like. I think it was the Moffat's second Capaldi season, where the entire season was all essentially two-parters with one kind of three-parter at the very end.
Yeah.
Because one of the great things, the great joys of classic Who was the cliffhanger. Yes, it was kind of silly, and usually the Doctor resolves it by someone turns up and goes, "Oh no, don't kill him," or the Doctor steps down a corridor. But there is still that joy of, ooh, it ends with a big monster, with like something like The Green Death Part 2, which is, ooh, it's a giant maggot.
Yeah.
Because that shit never gets old.
Yeah, more of that. Yeah. There you go. We managed to talk about Doctor Who again. We've been going 20 minutes and we've not even touched on the Ice Schooner, so there we go. But we'd better get to the Ice Schooner, hadn't we? So I think this is a critical thing here. What edition are you reading from?
I am reading from the Berkeley Books, New York. This edition is 1987.
Uh-huh.
And the Harper Printing History, Harper and Row edition, published in 1977. Copyright 16. Oh, God. He's not called Conrad von Beck in yours, is he?
No.
Okay, good.
No, he isn't. It's still called Conrad Arflane. But the fact that you are reading from a later edition, I think, is going to come into play in a very, very, very important way. Because I'm reading from a 1975 Sphere edition, which I'll just hold up, with a very attractive cover. It's this very nice Sphere edition. Now, this is definitely going to come up because this is a pre-revision edition. And this was revised multiple times. First time in 1977. So the fact that yours refers to the 77 publication means that yours is going to be the first revision.
Okay.
And it was revised multiple times over subsequent years. And this is going to come in very, very important as we go along for reasons that we'll get to. But I got this one from a second-hand shop a couple of years ago. Really bang-tidy copy. Lovely. Really like the cover. And it had someone's bookmark in it. And this bookmark is their TSB's Trusty Savings Bank savings subscription card. Now, this savings subscription card belonged to a chap called Chris Grimbley of Sheffield. And Chris put 3 lots of £5 into this saving account in November 1976. So the year after this book was released, this edition was released. And he had £15 in, and then there are no more entries. So his £15 could be worth a fortune today. So Chris Grimbley of Sheffield, who had an account with TSB in the 70s and put 15 quid in over the space of 3 weeks, get in touch, tell me what your address was, because the address is in here as well, and I will send you your TSB savings card.
Chris Grimbley might be one of the most northern names.
It is very, very northern.
And there are a lot of names in this in this book which could sound very northern. Also, does the TSB even still exist anymore?
Yes, it's split into Lloyds Bank and TSB, didn't it? So
Okay.
TSB is still a thing. They're merged and then they're split again. Yeah. So TSB is a thing. So, but anyway, all of these little details aside.
So your book, you don't have the Boris Vallejo cover where everyone is much too naked for how Arctic this world is.
No, I'm not sure who did this cover, and I should have really looked into it. But it is a very pretty cover. Yeah.
It kind of looks like the style of I can't remember the name of the artist, but he did the Elric at the End of Time.
Rodney Matthews.
Yes, there we go.
It's not a Rodney Matthews, but I will have to look into this, and I'll put it in the intro or outro I'll figure out who did this. But anyway, let's get cracking. I'm gonna read a bit just to set the scene. Let's have a look. So let's get our setup going. Get my readers on. I'm really struggling without my readers these days. Here we go. Chapter 1. Conrad Arflane, not Conrad van Beck. And as it happens, and I will refer to this later on, I have the Golanx collection that was released a few years ago, and he is similarly not called Conrad van Beck in this either. He's still called Arflane. Although there is a character in it called Manfred later on, so that's just obviously a name that stuck in Moorcock's head. When Conrad Arflane found himself without an ice ship to command, he left the city crevasse of Braeshill and set off on skis across the Great Ice Plateau. He went with the intention of deciding whether he should live or die. In order to allow himself no compromise, he took a small supply of food and equipment, reckoning that if he had not made up his mind within 8 days, he would die anyway of starvation and exposure. As he saw it, his reason for doing this was a good one. Although only 35 and one of the best-known skippers of the plateau, he had little chance of obtaining a new captaincy in Braeshill and refused to even consider serving as a first or second officer under another master, even if it were possible to get such a berth. Only 15 years before Braeshill had had a fleet of over 50 ships. Now she had 23. While he was not a morbid man, Arflane had decided that there was only one alternative to taking a command with some foreign city, and that was to die. So he set off, heading south across the plateau. There would be few ships in that direction and little to disturb him. Arflane was a tall, heavy man with a full red beard that now sparkled with rime. He was dressed in the black fur of the seal and the white fur of the bear. To protect his head from the cut of the cold wind, he wore a thick bearskin hood. To protect his eyes from the reflective glare of the sun on the ice, he wore a visor of thin cloth stretched on a seal bone frame. At his hip he had a short cutlass and a sealskin scabbard, and in either hand he had 8-foot harpoons which served him both as weapons and as ski poles. His skis were long strips cut from the bone of the great land whale. On these he was able to make good speed and soon found himself well beyond the normal shipping routes. As his distant ancestors had been men of the sea, Conrad Arflane was a man of the ice. He had the same solitary habits, the same air of self-sufficiency, the same distant expression in his grey eyes. The only great difference between Arflane and his ancestors was that they had been forced at times to desert the sea, whereas he was never away from the ice, for in these days it encircled the world. As Arflane knew, at all points of the compass lay ice of one sort or of another. Cliffs of ice, plains of ice, valleys of ice, and even, though he had only heard of them, whole cities of ice. Ice that constantly changed its colour as the sky changed colour. Ice of pale blue, purple, and ultramarine. Ice of crimson, of yellow and emerald green. In summer crevasses, glaciers and grottos were made even more beautiful by the deep, rich, glittering shades they reflected. And in winter, the bleak ice mountains and plateau possessed overpowering grandeur as they rose white, grey and black beneath the grim, snow-filled skies. At all seasons, there was no scenery, and that was not ice in all its varieties and colourings, and Arflane was deeply aware that the landscape would never change. There would be ice for all eternity. The Great Ice Plateau, which was the territory best known to Arflane, occupied and entirely covered the part of the world known as the Mato Grosso. The original mountains and valleys had long been engulfed by the ice, and the present plateau was several hundred miles in diameter, gradually sloping at its farthest points and joining with the rougher ice that surrounded it. Arflane knew the plateau better than most men, for he had first sailed the ice with his father before his second birthday and had been master of a stay-sail schooner before he was 21. His father had been called Conrad Arflane, as had all in the male line for hundreds of years, and they had all been masters of ships. Only a few generations back, members of the Arflane family had actually owned several vessels. The ice ships, trading vessels and hunting craft for the most part, were sailing ships mounted on runners like giant skis which bore them across the ice at great speed. Centuries old, the ships were the principal source of communication, sustenance and trade for the inhabitants of the 8 cities of the plateau. These settlements, situated in crevasses below the level of the ice, all owned sailing craft, and their power depended on the size and quality of their fleets. Arflane's home city, Braeshill, had once been the most powerful of them all, but her fleet was diminishing rapidly these days, and there were now more masters than ships. For Friesgalt, always Braeshill's greatest rival, had now risen to become the preeminent city of the plateau, dictating the terms of trade, monopolising the hunting grounds, and buying, as had recently happened to Arflane's Barquentine, ships from the men of other cities who were unable to compete. Okay. Good setup, depressed hero, frozen world. Nice. Yeah, classic depressed Moorcock hero there. She's always a winner. But on his 6th day out, he finds an old dude who turns out to be almost frozen to death. An old Friesgaltian nobleman. Arflane ain't keen on the Friesgalt lot, believing that they have ace schooners and, checks notes, give some of their women equality and don't make them do manual labour. So not only is Arthelen depressed, he's anti-work. Is he only into trad wives?
Who knows?
Well, we do find out a little bit more about Arthlen's predilections a little bit later, but it would explain why he's lonely and depressed. There is a bit where he catches up with one of his mates later, and there's a small anecdote about why he didn't tap off with this woman because she was too powerful. But still, he takes pity on this dude, bungs him in a heated sleeping sack on his back, and heads on his way. And the noble names himself as Lord Pyotr Rossefner. Right, we're going to have to agree pronunciation here. Rossefner?
I think it was Rossefny.
Rossefny. Okay, let's go with Rossefny. We'll agree on that. And this Rossefny is very grateful that a geezer from Brayshall would help him out, which is nice. In Chapter 2, there's more good stuff in Chapter 2. Smashing world building, I think, as Arthlen reaches Freesgalt. There's really great descriptions of clustered ice ships and masts and docks and bustling trade activity. Oh, it's very good. Makes the world feel really vibrant and lived in. And you have these excellent descriptions of sailors and whalers. You know, we'll get to the whaling business in a wee while, but whalers, you can almost smell the sweat and grime.
I do love the imagery of just like the use of the skis.
Yeah, I think the skis are just the bones of land whales, aren't they? Yeah, it's really good. Mike really indulges himself with all this as well. And if you reframed it slightly, it could actually be a really quite evocative description of the docks of somewhere like Hull in the 18th century, particularly all the details around whaling vessels and their crews. It's absolutely fantastic.
Wasn't this book like his big tribute to Joseph Conrad? I think I've read that.
Yeah, I think there's Conrad in there. There's definitely Melville in there. It's interesting when you're actually reading some of these passages. I mean, we know that Moorcock's really, really good at creating visceral action scenes and creating, in some of his books, he's created absolutely fantastic, vivid descriptions of towns and cities that you wouldn't necessarily see. And we get that later on with a description of Freesgalt with the different layers within the crevasse. It's all really cool stuff, and there's some really, really great stuff in here as well about the horrors of what whaling is like. There's a bit here. Some distance off along the line, a whaler was crewing up. The whaling men generally kept themselves apart from other sailors, disdaining their company, and the crews of the trading vessels were relieved that they did so, for both the North Ice and the South Ice whalers were more than boisterous in their methods of entertaining themselves. They were nearly all large men, swaggering along with their 10-foot harpoons on their shoulders, careless of where they swung them. They wore full, thick beards. Their hair was also thick and much longer than usual. It was often, like their beards, plaited and held in place by whale grease, fashioned into strange barbaric styles. Their fares were rich, of a kind only normally worn by aristocrats, for whalemen could afford anything they pleased to purchase, if they were successful. But the fares were stained and worn casually. Arthlen had been a whaling skipper through much of his career and felt a comradeship for these coarse-voiced North Ice whaling men as they swung aboard their ship. Aside from the few whalers, which were mainly three-masted barks or barkentines, there were all kinds of boats and ships on the oil-slippery ice. There were the little yachts and ketches used for work around the dock, and brigs, brigantines, two-mast, two-topsail schooners, cutters and sloops. Most of the trading ships were three-mast square-rigged ships, but there was a fair scattering of two-mast brigs and two-mast schooners. The colours for the most part were dull weather-beaten browns, blacks and greens. The hunting ships of the whaling men were invariably black-hulled, stained by the blood of generations of slaughtered land whales. Because, of course, these are hunting land whales, not whales at sea, so the idea that these ships, they wade through blood, the blood of these creatures that they hunt, it's really, I mean, a nice bit of detail is probably the wrong way to describe it, but it's very vivid and effective. Yeah. Apart from the horrors of actual whaling, it makes it all more visceral and convincing and establishes a tone quite unlike, I think, any Moorcock I've read. I've never really read passages like this in Moorcock books. I think it's fantastic. There's lots more detail about ships and names, one of which is the Ice Spirit, which we will get to a little bit later. But anyway, he approaches the main gates, and after some flim-flam with a guard, is taken, along with his bloke in a sack, down through multiple levels of the city within a crevasse, also with some nice detail of the city, to the house of Rossefny. And along the way, there is another nice bit of detail about the world and how people see the world. Right, it says, it took a long time to get the Lord Rossefni to a level lying midway on the face of the crevasse. The level was lighted dimly by bulbs powered by the same source that heated the residential sections of the cavern city. This source lay at the very bottom of the crevasse and was regarded, even by the myth-mocking Friegaltian aristocracy, with superstition. To the ice dwellers, cold was the natural condition of everything, and heat was an evil necessity for their survival, but it did not make it any the less unnatural. In the Ice Mother's land, there was no heat, and none was needed to sustain the eternal life of all those who joined her when they died and became cold. Heat could destroy the ice, and this was sure proof of its evil. Down at the bottom of the crevasse, the heat, it was rumoured, reached an impossible temperature, and it was here that those who had offended against the Ice Mother went in spirit after they had died. That's nice too. More nice world building. I really like all this stuff. When we did, what was it? The Phoenix in Obsidian. One of the listeners contacted us and said that some of the details and some of the city names in there suggested that Phoenix in Obsidian is the far future of this world, which is an interesting one, because in this world you have this dichotomy of belief that will come across where Arflame believes that the world is dying and ultimately it will only get colder. Whereas there are others believe that the science says that the Earth is going through a cold snap, but it will recover because this has happened in the past. Ultimately, this will become the source of the quest, and we'll get to that and the outcome of that. But he reaches the level that the Rossefni family occupied, and it's plush, it's warm, and the Lord Rossefni's son-in-law, Ulsen, Janek Ulsen, well, turns out he's a bit of a dick, isn't he? Although the narrative tells us he's a dick. How much of a dick is he?
I mean, it is that case of, since this is third person limited, we are pretty much with Conrad for the whole space of the book. So it could very much be like we are seeing it from Conrad's point of view, and Conrad is not the most heroic of heroes, even by Moorcock standards.
We are absolutely seeing it from his point of view. The narrative wants to tell us, and take great pains to tell us at all time, that Janek Ulsen is a dick. So let's find out how much of a dick he is. Now I'm just gonna lean over and get another my backup beer. So it's plush, it's warm, the son-in-law greets him, and we learn that the Lord set out on an exploration expedition with many other people who never came back some time ago, and he must have come to grief. But he does offer Arflane a reward, a shit ton of bearskins, which is a fortune in this world. But Arflane is inscrutable and not bothered, or he wants to be inscrutable. He's not inscrutable to us. Arflane is a bit of a dick, really.
Yeah.
But he wants to be inscrutable. He just wants his sleeping sack back. But what is it, Miles, that changes his mind?
It turns out that Janek Ulsen, who is described, I wouldn't say that Janek Ulsen is described is described as being very kind of effeminate. But when you consider that Conrad has basically been described as shall we say, Brian Blessed circa Flash Gordon?
Yeah.
With a big red bushy beard,
a salted beard,
and a salted beard, and clad in bearskins. And then you've got Janek Ulsen, who is thin-faced with pursed lips and pale blue eyes, with white skin, and it's just like, he is effeminately coded in the way that all great Disney animated movie villains are.
Yeah, it's coded as a complete weed.
Yeah, he is basically, if Conrad is Dennis the Menace, then Janek Ulsen is Walter the Softy.
Yes, he is, very much. And Walter the Softy just happens to have a wife who is Lord Rossefni's daughter, and what would you know? She's a flaxen-haired hot babe. And she comes out and says, you're the guy who saved my dad. He wants you to hang around so he can display his gratitude, so please accept our hospitality and stay with us. So Arflane's like, no, I've got to go die on the ice. But on the other hand, you're quite hot. I'm not going to stay here because I'm too manly to stay in this kind of weirdo place that's too hot, and it's got furnishings. Furnishings.
I can't stay here. I'm having a crisis of class consciousness.
That's right, yeah. And he continues to have that, but he decided to stay at a local hostel instead. So it's amazing what a hot babe can do to make a dude hang about. And he's already sensed that there's a distinct lack of love between her and her husband Yannick. Now, at this point, we don't get a name. It's just Olsen's wife. But in Chapter 3, we find out straight away her name. It's Ulrika. Ulrika Kaka. Yeah, so this... Against his normal instinct, Conrad Arflane decided to wait in Friesgalt until the old man could talk to him. He was not sure why he waited. If asked, he would have said it was because he didn't want to lose a good sleeping sack. And besides, he had nothing better to do. He would not have admitted that it was Ulrika Ulston who kept him in the city. Of course it was. Of course it was. It's a Moorcock character. He's met a woman, so he's going to ask her to marry him in 3, 2, 1. She's looked at him, is in love straight away.
I have met a woman.
Yeah.
She is now. She must be mine. Yeah, he's best. Basically, I've got to ask: was Mike Havoc going for a breakup when writing this book?
Well, this is written in '66 and first serialised in one of the SF mags. Can't remember off the top of my head which one. So it was written in '66, and I think Mike's already got form by this point for being pretty sketchy when it comes to drawing female characters. And let's face it, he wouldn't get any good at it for another 10 years yet.
I want to ask you a brief tangent. Have you ever read The Dying of the Light by George R.R. Martin?
No.
Very kind of similar kind of torrid romance in a but in a more space opera setting. It's his first novel, and it's honestly, if you get a chance to check it out, I do recommend it. Okay. Because it's always a shame with Martin that he kind of gets lumped in with the fact that Song of Fire of Ice got really popular, because all his other stuff is honestly really good and should get more of appreciation, like, you know, stuff like the Wildcard Shared Universe kind of novels, or the Armageddon Rag, which is a 70s rock and roll novel with satanic elements. But The Dying of the Light is a romance novel where this weedy scholar of a bloke gets called to this alien planet by his ex, who is married to a local chieftain, and the main character thinks, "Oh, she's come to take me back," and immediately starts pissing everyone off on the planet and causing no end of strife for himself and everyone else. Yeah. Because he's unabashedly, yeah, I just want to steal your wife back, mate, because you know, she was mine first, clearly. But I got a lot of vibes from this book.
Yeah, I think it is something of a pattern with this kind of fiction and the people who write it, that perhaps earlier in their lives, Now, the weird thing about Moorcock is he was brought up by his mother, largely, and he worked with women in a typing pool from the age of from being a teenager. Nevertheless, all of his characters all betray the same kind of lack of ability to identify healthily with women.
It's just, you know, it's that thing of just, you know, it's, I think sometimes, you know, I admit that I have not always been the best with writing female characters, and sometimes it is just, okay, you just have to write them as people, but sometimes it is hard not to just kind of write women as some kind of other.
Well, this is definitely the case in these books, isn't it?
Yes.
They're barely more than, they're not even ciphers. There are plot devices.
I mean, we're a long way from like the female characters of Coming Out of Terror Files, but we have kind of progressed a bit after the female characters of the Sundered Worlds, who were kind of doormats.
Well, I guess it remains to be seen what Ulrika Olsen turns out to be, but yeah, we'll find out, won't we?
Yep.
Arflane goes for a wander by the docks, surveys the massive and impressive ice spirit ship that he saw earlier on, is invited aboard by the ice spirit's number 2, Petchnioff, and he learns that the ice spirit is the Lord Rorsefnith's ship, and it's been stood idle since its master has been on his expedition, and he also meets the third in command, a grizzled old ice dog called Christoph Hinson. And Hinson's a pretty chill old dude, particularly considering Arflane cost him his ship 5 years ago, and his contract to run it in a competitive land whale hunt. But It was fair as it happened, so he's quite philosophical about it. But there is this exchange between the three that once again adds a little bit more detail to the world and the inhabitants' view of it. We'll see less of this weather as time goes on, said Petchniov thankfully. Snow comes only once in 10 or 15 days now. My father remembers it falling so often it seemed to last the whole summer, and the winds were harsher in the winter too. Hinson dusted snow off his jerkin. You're right, lad. The world has changed since I was young. She's warming up. In a few generations we'll be skipping about on the surface naked. Ha 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 ha! He laughed at his own joke. Arflane felt uneasy. He did not want to spoil the pleasant mood, but he had to speak.
Not talk the Ice Mother should hear, friends. Besides, what you say is untrue. The climate alters a little way or another from year to year, but over a lifetime, it grows steadily colder. That must be so. The world is dying.
That's commitment to the role. Stripping your throat.
Ugh.
So our ancestors thought and symbolised their ideas in the creed of the Ice Mother, Petchniov said, smiling. But what if there were no Ice Mother? Suppose the sun were getting hotter and the world changing back to what it was before the ice came. What if the idea were true, that this is the only one of several ages when the ice has covered the world? Certain old books say as much, Captain.
I would call that blasphemous nonsense,
Arflane said sharply.
You know yourself that those books contain many strange notions which we know to be false. The only book I believe is the book of the Ice Mother. She came from the centre of the universe, bringing cleansing ice. One day, her purpose will be fulfilled, and all will be ice. All will be purified. Read what you will into that. Say that the Ice Mother does not exist, that her story only represents the truth. But you must admit that even some of the old books said the same, that all heat must disappear.
Hinson glanced at him sardonically. Sardonically? Hinson glanced at him sardonically. There are signs that the old ideas are false. Followers of the Ice Mother say all must grow cold. But you know that we have scholars in Friesgalt who make it their business to measure the weather. We got our power through their knowledge. The scholars say the level of the ice has dropped a few degrees in the last 2 or 3 years, and one day the sun will burn yellow hot again, and it will melt the ice away. They say that the sun is hotter already, and the beasts move south, anticipating the change. They smell a new sort of life, Arflane, life like the weed plants we find in the warm ponds, but grown on land out of stuff that is like little bits of crumbled rock, out of earth. They believe that these must already exist somewhere, that they have always existed, perhaps on islands in the sea.
There is no sea.
The scholars think we could not have survived if there were not a sea somewhere, and these plants grown on islands.
No.
You say not, but reason says it is the truth.
Reason? Or some twist of mind that passes for reason? There's no true logic in what you say. You only prattle a warped idea you would rather believe. Your kind of thinking will bring disaster to us all.
I see this as a fact, Captain Arflane. The ice is softening as we grow soft. Just as the beast sent the new life, so do we. That is why our ideas are changing. I desire no change. I am only sorry, for I could love no other world than the one I know. I'll die in my own world, but what will our descendants miss? The wind, the snow, and the swift ice. The sight of a herd of whales speeding in flight before your fleet. The harpoon's leap, the fight under a red round sun hanging frozen in the blue sky. The spout of black whale blood, brave as the men who led it. Where will all that be when the icelands become dirty, unfirm earth and brittle green? What will men become? All we love and admire will be belittled and then forgotten in that clogged, hot, unhealthy place. What a tangled, untidy world it will be. But it will be!
Arflane slapped the rail, scattering the snow.
You're insane. How can all this change?
You could be right, but what I see, sane or not, is what I see. Straight and definite. Inevitable.
You deny every rule of nature? Even a fool must admit that nothing becomes hot of its own accord after it has become cold. See what is about you, not what you think is here. I understand your reasoning, but it is soft reasoning, wishful reasoning, death. Christoph Hinson, death is all that is inevitable. Once there was this dirt, this green, this life. I accept that. But it died. Does a man die, become cold, and then suddenly grow warm again, springing up saying, I died, but now I live. Can't you see how your logic deceives you? Whether the Ice Mother is real, or only a symbol of what is real, she must be honoured. Lose sight of that, as you and Friesgold have done, and our people will die sooner than they need. You think me a superstitious barbarian, I know, for holding the views I hold, but there is good sense in what I say.
I envy you for being able to stay so certain.
And I pity you for your unnecessary sorrow.
Oh, nice. So, yeah, there's some very, very different views of the world, and Arthur's is pretty pessimistic, pretty nihilistic view of this world.
Read it while growling my way through that. I just realized we're kind of in a lot of, especially Moorcock, like 60s and 70s stuff, does really talk about entropy, about everything breaking down. And I feel this is kind of an inverse because it starts off entropic, and the world is slowly changing. The world is slowly reliving, and it instead, like, the entropy is not really the world. It is the ability to kind of change your ideas and philosophy as the world changes. And the thing about Conrad's is he feels unable to kind of change, despite the fact that the world is clearly changing around him, that he is unable to accept that, and so he can only inevitably just break down.
It's a strange inversion, isn't it? Because if Arthur is wrong and the world is recovering, he is still pursuing self-destruction in the face of it. He's pursuing self-destruction and powerlessness, and he's removing his own agency until the point where a hot babe drops into the narrative.
Yeah, because the most difficult thing you can ever really do is learn how to change who you are, because that's difficult.
I don't know. Maybe Moorcock has struck on something here. Maybe the only thing that can stop some people from being nihilistic losers is the love of a babe. You know? I suppose that reflecting on it personally, I think I was probably a bit of a tool before Phil straightened me out.
Oh, I was definitely a tool for a long time. Until honestly, moving to a different country really helped and then meeting co-workers at a job who were able to sit me down and go, okay, we get that you're from England.
Yeah.
But there are some things we do have to kind of discuss.
Yeah.
And it is kind of like, oh shit. And there's that's kind of that awful kind of moment of going, oh shit, you're right.
Yeah.
What's the name of the book, the interview book he did with Colin Greenland?
Death is no obstacle.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry, the line is death is all that is inevitable. Here.
Yeah. So Arthur hangs around for a few days. He's getting frustrated. Fortunately, a Brayshall ship rocks up, captained by a flash Harry called Johan Bren, and he almost does a handbrake turn into the harbour, which is quite amusing. But it's an old booker of his, and there's a little exchange that sheds more light on Arthur's character. And it says, no ship, he told Bren. She was given up to honour a bad debt of the owners, sold to a Friesgalt merchant, because, of course, Bren's asked, where's your ship? It says, Bren nodded sympathetically. Not the last, I'd guess. You should have stayed at the whaling. There's always work for us whalers, whatever happens. And you didn't even marry the woman in the end, he chuckled. Bren was referring to a time 6 years since when Arthur had taken a trading command as a favour to a girl he had wished to marry. It was only after he had done this that he had realised he wanted no part of a girl who could demand such terms. By then, it had been too late to get his command of the whaler back. So,
and it's going to be something like, can you shave your beard?
Yeah.
Can you wash out the whale guts?
Even to the point where he's like, I want to marry her. It's because she spoke to him to commission him. Oh my God, this woman spoke to me. We must marry. You know? Oh my God. He goes knock kneed the moment he gets within the rough proximity of a woman. So, but it turns out he really is into tradwives, because a powerful woman who has the ability to commission ships. God, no. Oh, good luck with that, you tool, Arthur. But this is another great chapter. It reads like a historical novel, again set in Hull in 1820. There's loads of great detail about the whaling business. the challenges of a bad season, as well as auguring a sense of doom about this dying world. It all really feels quite authentic. It's great stuff. It's one of those Moorcock books when I'm reading it and thinking about sections to read out on this episode. You really could just open this book at random and drop a pin, and what you'll find is pretty fantastic.
This book has made me kind of regret that I've yet to read Moby Dick.
Mm.
And I, it's Moby Dick is up there with, like, again, Joseph Conrad, and to my shame, Charles Dickens, of authors I will get around to inevitably.
Yeah. I think there'll be a lot of lovely detail about some of those things in there as well. Have you ever read a book called The North Water?
No, I have not.
There was a BBC TV show of it with Colin Farrell playing this murderous whaler, and it starts and finishes in Hull. And one of the pubs that one of the scenes take place in is called the Whalebone, which is one of my haunts when I lived in Hull. It's one of Hull's oldest pubs. It's still there. And Hull was a big whaling town. But all this stuff is really not that dissimilar to some of the early scenes in the North Water, which is a cracking book, by the way. I really, really, really recommend it. But Bren and Arthlen hit the hostelries and meet up with a grizzled character called Flatch. And this is fucking ace. I love this. I love it. There were 3 whaling hostels on the 3rd level. They walked past the first 2, the King Hedada and the Killer Purse, and came to the Ship Smasher. Like the other 2, the Ship Smasher had a huge whale jawbone for a doorway and a small whale skull hanging as a sign outside. They opened the battered door and walked straight into the hostel's main room. It was dark, large and high-roofed, though it gave the impression of being cramped. Its walls were covered with crudely tanned whale hides. Faulty lighting strips flickered at odd places on ceilings and walls, and the place smelled strongly of ale, whale meat, and human sweat. Crude pictures of whales, whaling men, and whaling ships were hung on the hides, as were harpoons, lances, and the 3-foot broad-bladed cutlasses, similar to the one Arthlen wore, that were used mainly for flenching. Some of the harpoons had been twisted into fantastic shapes, telling of the death struggles of particular whales. None of these whaling tools were crossed, for the whalesmen regarded it as unlucky to cross harpoons or flenching cutlasses. Groups of whaling men lounged at the closely packed tables, sitting on hard benches and drinking a beer that was brewed from one of the many kinds of weed found in the warm ponds. This ale was extremely bitter, and few but whaling men would drink it. Arthlen and Brent, I want some of that, by the way. I'm not saying I'm a whaling man, I'm rock hard. I just want this extremely bitter beer. I want to try it. Arthlen and Bren walked through the clusters of tables up to the small counter. Behind it, in a cubbyhole, sat a shadowy figure who rose as they approached. Flatch, the owner of the Ship Smasher, had been a whaling man many years before. He was taller than Arthlen, but almost unbelievably obese, with a great belly, an enormously fat arm and leg. He had only one eye, one ear, one arm and one leg, as if a huge knife had been used to shear off everything down one side of him. He had lost these various organs and limbs in an encounter with the whale called Ship Smasher, a huge bull that he had been the first to harpoon. The whale had been killed, but Flatch had been unable to carry on whaling and had bought the hostel out of his share of the proceeds. As a tribute to his kill, he had named the hostel after it. As recompense, he had used the whale's ivory to replace his arm and leg, and a triangle of its hide was used as a patch for his missing eye. Flatch's remaining eye peered through the layers of fat surrounding it, and he raised his whalebone arm in greeting. Oh, love it. Love it. You know, a lot of people, when you look up reviews of the Ice Schooner, it reviews and gets rated pretty poorly compared to Moorcock's classic run of this time. But I could read a whole book of just this. It's fantastic.
There's some fantastic world building. It's just that, I think the problem is your main character, even by Moorcock standards, is a bit of a self-absorbed jerk. I mean, when you make Elric look like he has more of a sense of wanting to know what the world is like, you're in trouble. I mean, he's not, say, like, he's definitely in that kind of, like, a lot of the heroes of his, like, Moorcock 60s sci-fi novels, which are all, like, men who are driven to the point of obsession with, like, in pursuit of a single ideal of a character to the point where it will destroy them somehow.
Yes, and not only that, but in the version I'm reading, he's worse than boring. And I suspect that the version you're reading will be the same as the Golanx edition that I plucked off the shelf earlier, but we'll get to that shortly. But it continues in the same vein. After Flatch agrees to look after Bren's crew on credit, a massive harpooner called Urquhart approaches them. I like Urquhart. He's cool. He's basically Queequeg, isn't he?
Yeah.
But he's the most famous harpooner around. He warns Bren about the lack of prizes and how impoverished the business is getting. There are no catches. The fish are leaving, he says. It's a grim warning to Bren, and he really doesn't like it. But the description of Urquhart is fucking fantastic. It says, he cradled a long, heavy harpoon in one massive arm, and the other hand was on his hip. His face, even in the poor flickering light, could be seen to be red, mottled, and ravaged by wind, sun, and frostbite. It was a near fleshless head, and the bones jutted like the ribs of a ship. His nose was long and narrow, like the inverted prow of a clipper, and there was a deep scar under his right eye and another on his left cheek. His hair was black, piled, and plaited on his head in a kind of coiled pyramid that broke at the top into two stiff pieces resembling the fins of a whale or seal. This strange hairstyle was held in place by clotted blubber, and its smell was strong. His furs were of fine quality, but matted with whale blood and blubber, smelling rancidly. The jacket was open to the neck, revealing a whale-toothed necklace. From both earlobes were suspended pieces of flat carved ivory. He wore boots of soft leather, drawn up to the knee and fastened against his fur breeches by means of bone pins. Around his waist was a broad belt, from which hung a scabbarded cutlass and a large pouch. He seemed a savage, even amongst whaling men, but he had a powerful presence, partially due to his narrow eyes, which were cold, glinting blue. Oh, fantastic. Fantastic. Moorcock's always great with his descriptions of sartorial elegance, but he's equally good describing someone like that. It's great. You can almost smell him off the page. Absolutely fantastic.
He definitely reads. He definitely sounds like a character you would meet on the streets of Brighton one night.
Yeah, so Brighton now is like Hull was in 1820.
Pretty much, I mean, with more hips and less whaling men.
Yeah.
But, you get those characters who have been around since... You get those characters who were old when your dad was a kid.
Yes.
And you don't want to talk about it because that might, you might have to accept some views on the universe. But, you have those characters in those kind of cities who everyone knows on sight, and they all look ridiculous.
Yeah. I think probably the closest thing that I can remember from childhood in Hull was if you went into Hull bus station, long since pulled down. Hull bus station was like a mess of concrete and blue-painted steel girders and rivets with concrete platforms. And off to one side, at one end, there was a pub called the Green Gingerman, which again, long since pulled down, probably pulled down 30 years ago. And off to one side was the bus driver's cafeteria. I say cafeteria, it was just like a door with smoke that billowed out of it. And you would get the guys standing outside there with their mugs of tea if they couldn't all get in. And Hull bus drivers back then, when I was 16, 15, they will all have been in their 60s. They were tanned, leathery. They probably doubled their weight in just the sheer amount of pomade they had on their hair, which blackened it down to make it look black. Some of them were still dressing as teddy boys.
God,
seriously,
I can smell the secondhand smoke.
Oh, it's absolutely incredible. Absolutely incredible. Like nicotine stained fingers, pomade. Some of them wearing half masts and shawadi waddy shoes. With their teddy boy haircuts. They've been teddy boys since the 50s, and by God, they were going to stay teddy boys as long as possible. Absolutely fantastic. That's probably as close as you would get to 1820 Whalebone Hull was the bus driver's cafe in Hull in 1983.
Now they're all just kind of frequenting a Greasy Spoon cafe instead of like a whaling hostel.
Yeah. It's great. But anyway, Bren's crew are getting looked after by Flatch in the Ship Smasher hostel because Bren appeals to Flatch. Because their catch has been so poor, we learned earlier that they had a really poor catch, like a couple of calves and a fairly small bull. So Bren is a bit doom-laden and depressed about the encounter with Urquhart. And again, there's a really fantastic page here. It says... The beer had in fact succeeded in turning Bren in on himself, and he was uncommunicative, constantly twisting his head round to look at the door, which had now been closed. Arthur knew that Bren was expecting no one. At last he leaned over the table and said,
Urquhart seemed a gloomy individual, Bren, perhaps even mad. He sees the bad luck of everything. I've been here for some days, and I've seen the catches unloaded. They're smaller than usual, certainly, but not that small. We've both had as poor catches, and they've done us no harm in the long term. It happened to me for several seasons running, and then I had plenty of luck for another 3. The owners were worried, but...
There you have it, Arthur Lane. I'm my own master now. The tender maiden's mine. I bought her 2 seasons back. Again he laughed bitterly. I thought I was doing a sensible thing, seeing that so many have had our ships sold over our heads in the past years. It looks as if I'll be selling my own craft up of my own head at this rate, or hiring out to some Friesgaltian merchant. I'll have no choice. And there's my crew, willing to gamble with me. Do I tell them Urquhart's news? They've wives and children, as have I. Shall I tell them?
It would do no good.
And where are the fish going? What's happening to the herds?
Urquhart says they're going south. Perhaps the clever man will be the one who learns how to follow them, how to live off what provisions he can find on the ice. There are more warm ponds to the south. Possibly a means of tracking the herds could be devised.
Will that help me this season?
I don't know.
He was thinking now about his conversation about the ice spirit, and he began to feel even more depressed. Fletcher's Hawes came down to the main room of the hostel. Fletcher had done nothing by halves. There was a girl for every man, including Arflane and Bren. Katerina, Fletcher's youngest daughter, a girl of 18, approached them, holding the hand of another girl who was as dark and pretty as Fletcher's daughter was fair and plain. Katerina introduced the other girl as Maggie. Arflane attempted to sound jovial.
Here's someone to cheer you up.
Ugh. So Fletch haws out his own daughters. It's all a bit earthy. It's like listening in to two trawler captains in Rainers on Ezel Road. And it's all very earthy. It's like someone nips down Waterhouse Lane and brings some working girls back. But yeah, the chapter only continues in the same vein too. Of the following pages, a stranger enters the bar, interrupting the revelry, not by intention, just by his appearance. A dandyish-looking young noble who causes hilarity amongst the drunken whalers, who spare no time whatsoever into setting to mocking and bullying him for obviously not being one of them. And at this stage, Arflane has no sympathy whatsoever. At this point, as far as he's concerned, why on earth would such a fella set foot in a place like this? But, long story short, he is Lord Piotr Rorsefner's nephew, Manfred, and he wants to let Arflane know that his uncle is awake and wants to see him. So Arflane reluctantly, at first, gently intervenes, but the whalers want their sport, and it all turns into a massive 2-page long bar fight, and it's fucking ace. All of this is unlike anything else I can recall Mike writing. And it struck me reading this at this point. Had this been sold to me as a Robert E. Howard story, I wouldn't have even been slightly suspicious. I know that Moorcock said that he was being influenced by Conrad and some of the themes are there, but the way I was writing it, this is Moorcock by way of Two-Fisted Bob Howard and the salty nautical nous of William Hope Hodgson, and I absolutely love it, and I wish he'd done more of it. It's great stuff. Fortunately for Arflane, he was getting a solid beating at this point.
Our hero loses a drunken bar fight.
He does. He's getting absolutely leathered by whalers. But this basically, Urquhart turns up and he roars into the place. He roars, where is it? Fish, you cave-bound fools! Fish, I tell you! Fish, you dog hunters! Fish, you beer swillers! Fish to take the rust off your lances! A herd of 100 or more, not 50 miles distant at south-southwest. So Urquhart turns up with a young lad. It turns out he's a cabin boy. And he tells of a sighting of a huge herd of land whales, and the place pretty much empties out. Bren heads back to the Ice Spirit, leaving Urquhart, Arflane, and young Manfred. As it turns out, long story short, Urquhart knows Manfred very well, because Manfred, in a cheeky way, refers to him as cousin. And this might be one of my favourite Mike chapters in ages. It's rich in flavour, detail, intrigue, establishes the main character, some of the supporting cast. Fletch and Urquhart are amazing, straight out of Melville. Manfred, the sardonic youngster, is pure Moorcock. The relationship between him and Urquhart is a great touch, with the mighty Urquhart being embarrassed by the familial connection to a noble family, yet showing loyalty and being protective of the young lad, despite his teasingly referring to him as cousin in front of whalers. It's great. It's an absolute jam-packed chapter, that. There is so much going on and so much detail. But Moorcock books always like to establish the detail. It's what we understand and what we know. Is it that common for a Moorcock book to spend this much time establishing the world and detail before we get to quest mode?
I don't really think so, because also usually when we go into quest mode for most kind of like more, especially like the Moorcock heroic stuff.
Yeah.
The villainy has already been established like 5 pages in.
Yes.
And I think, you know, like you have something like the Jewel in the Skull, which takes more time in establishing the villain and the love interest before establishing Dorian Hawkmoon himself.
Yeah.
And then we got Coram, who gets, you know, is missing a hand and an eye in the rest of his people by about 20 pages in.
Yeah. We have no clearly established villain here. All we have is a really beautifully established world, which I absolutely love. I really love it. And my fear when I'm reading this far in, I'm thinking, right, Mike at this point is full of energy. This is day one of the 3 days. He's absolutely boiling with energy and it's flying off his fingers and it's brilliant. But, you know, how long will this be maintained? Well, let's find out. So Arthlen wakes up hungover at the Rossefni place because Manfred convinced him to go there. He's a bit embarrassed, but Manfred's full of beans and takes him for breakfast, which is a very awkward affair because he accidentally knocks his knee with Ulrika. Her husband being a stiff Burke and Manfred smirking his way through it all, manages to manipulate a situation where Arthlen agrees to captain a hunt for them so they can get in on the huge herd that was sighted. But not without Arthlen grumbling, "A yacht? With a woman on board? Whale hunting? I'll take no such responsibility." He does though. Why? Because he fancies her. Yeah, he fancies her. So inevitably, he fancies this babe. And they've knocked knees now. Accidentally. Well, what's going to happen next?
Well, you see, they knock knees. It's a sign that she fancies him.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
He sits next to her. They accidentally knock knees. Therefore, they are destined to be with each other. Because
You know,
that's
it's how it was in school. You sit next to someone on a table. They look at you. They take an intake of breath. Clearly, a torrid romance for the ages.
Yeah. Yeah. So Quest mode is engaged because he goes to see the recovering Lord Pyotr Rossefni. I say recovering. Well, we'll see how long that lasts. Turns out Rossefni's expedition that went awry was seeking the mythical city of New York. Ancient, fabled, buried in the ice far to the north. New York, where the ice ghosts have their court. The city of the Ice Mother. And only there can the proof be found, Rossefni believes, that this age of ice will one day end. Or as Arthlen believes, of course, that it will only worsen until the Earth dies altogether. And of course, because Arthlen is our hero, and because we now understand that there is a mythical city of New York, he wants Arthlen to lead the expedition and captain the Ice Spirit. Blimey. So Arthlen's reluctant at first, but he agrees to think it over. I mean, we know he will, because otherwise we wouldn't have a fucking book, would we? But he agrees to think it over. But first, there's a whale hunt to sort out. And Arthlen mulls over his position. Yeah, just read this little bit here. How does he get to his position? Well, leaving the room, Arthlen realised he had been drawn irrevocably into the affairs of the Rossefni household, and that, ever since he had saved the man's life, his fate had been linked with theirs. They had somehow seduced him. Made him their man. He knew that he would. I'm not having that. He knew that he would take the command offered by Pyotr Rossefni just as he had taken the command of the yacht offered by Manfred Rossefni. Without appearing to have lost any of his integrity, he was no longer his own master. Pyotr Rossefni's strength of character, Ulrika Ulsson's beauty and grace, Manfred Rossefni's subtlety, even Yannick Ulsson's belligerence had combined to trap him. Disturbed, Arthlen walked back towards the breakfast room. Yeah, he's a bit of a pushover, isn't he?
Yeah. It's definitely that feel of, you know, he is a simple man and thus easily trapped.
Yeah.
In by just appealing to his basic vanity.
Yeah. And if we thought the narrative was telling us Yannick is a dick, we even learned that the old lord thinks his son-in-law is a dick when he half jokes it would be cool if he died on the whale hunt. Harsh. Not only does he say it'd be cool if he died on the whale hunt, but he also says it'd be even cooler if Ulrika could get together with Arthlen. So it's like, anyway.
Dad, you're being awkward again.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Oh, Dad, stop it.
Dad.
So the whale hunt. The narrative again really wants us to dislike Yannick. They're all boarding the yacht to go a-hunting, and Arthlen observes the couple coming aboard. And it says, Yannick Ulsson, his lips pursed, an expression one of thinly disguised anxiety, was helping his wife aboard. Arthlen thought perhaps she should be helping her husband. What a fanny.
Arthlen, Conrad, mate, if she helps him on board, that puts her out of... That means you're completely unattracted to her because she's doing something.
Because she's a powerful woman. Yeah.
He is Conrad is definitely the kind of guy who opens doors open for people and gets offended when they don't say thank you.
Yeah, it's true. It's absolutely true. But Athlen soon learns that the crew of the yacht, led by first mate Haber, Haber won't be alive very long, so we won't bother talking too much about him, are not seasoned whalers. Although Urquhart is aboard, so there is that. Basically, they're like a pleasure boat, this lot. They're like an aristocrat's pleasure boat, and they've decided to go whaling. He's also a bit miffed that this means they'll only be able to go after small, isolated prey and not compete with the big whalers. And he reckons it's unmanly to hunt small game just to entertain aristocrats. I have no sympathy for you, Conrad Arflane. You made this bed yourself. And, as we might expect, the whale hunt all goes Pete Tong. Goes Pete Tong, Miles. And it is, by turns, disturbingly violent and incredibly exciting, because Moorcock not only does great action scenes, he does blindingly good nautical action scenes. And if, like me, you're on the side of the land whales in all this, one land whale manages to cause so much havoc and carnage amongst the whalers, it's actually quite satisfying. But by the end of it, the yacht's wrecked, half the crew is dead, Yannick ran away and left Ulrika to be rescued by Arflane. Although, we only have Manfred's word for that, because nobody else saw it. Bit suspicious about that. And then Arflane and Ulrika ultimately had to be saved by Urquhart. And Yannick broke both his legs, because he's a weed. Sadly for Arflane, though, he witnessed the demise of his mate from Brayshall. Poor Bren. Oh, Bren. You burned so brightly.
There was a line of dialogue I found very funny, which on mine is on page 69, when Janek Olsen says, "I have broken both my legs." I don't know why I found that particular line of dialogue so funny. Because it just feels so kind of matter-of-fact, it almost feels like a parody, like a ripping yarns, where you have like the aristocratic lord just going, "Oh, bother.
Yeah.
I appear to have broken both my legs."
Yeah. I've not broken one leg, I've broken both my legs. Maybe he thinks that makes him harder. I've not just broken a leg, I've broken both legs. That's how fucking rock I am. But anyway, there's this lovely description of how Bren gets his. It says, dark red whale blood ran over the churned whiteness of the ice. Small boats with harpooners ready in their bows sped after the huge mammals, or elsewhere were hauled at breakneck pace in the wake of skewered leviathans, towed by taut harpoon lines wound around the small capstans in the bows. One boat passed quite close, seeming hardly to touch the ground as it bounced over the ice, drawn by a pain-enraged cow who was 4 times the length and twice the height of the boat itself. She was opening and shutting her massive tooth-filled jaws as she moved, using front and back flippers to push herself at almost unbelievable speed away from the source of her agony. The boat's runners, sprung on a matrix of bone, came close to breaking as she was hurled into the air and crashed down again. Her crew was sweating and clinging grimly to her sides to avoid being flung out. Those who could doused the running lines with water to stop them burning. The cow's hide, scarred, ripped and bleeding from the wounds of a dozen harpoons, was a brown-grey colour and covered in wiry hair. Like most of her kind, it did not occur to her to turn on the boat, which she could have snapped in two in an instant with her 15-foot jaws. She was soon past and beginning to falter as Arflane watched. In another place, a bull had been turned over onto its back and was waving his massive flippers feebly in his death throes. Around him, several boatloads of hunters had disembarked onto the ice and were warily approaching with lances and flenching cutlasses at the ready. The men were dwarfed by the monster, who lay dying on his back and his mouth opening and shutting, gasping for breath. Beyond, Arflane saw a cow writhing and shuddering as her blood spouted from a score of wounds. The yacht was almost on the calves now. Arflane's eyes were attracted by a movement to starboard. A huge bull whale was rushing across the ice directly in the path of the yacht, towing a longboat behind him. A collision was imminent. Desperately, he swung the wheel hard over. The yacht's runners squealed as she began to turn, narrowly missing the snorting whale, but still in danger of fouling the boat's lines and wrecking them both. Arflane leaned with all his strength on the wheel and barely succeeded in steering the yacht onto a parallel course. Now he could see the occupants of the boat. Standing by the prow, a harpoon ready in one hand, the other gripping the side, was Captain Bren. His face was twisted in hatred for the beast as it dragged his longboat after it. The whale, startled by the sudden appearance of the yacht, now turned around until its tiny eyes glimpsed Bren's boat. Instantly it rushed down on Bren and his crew. Arflane heard the captain scream as the huge jaws opened to their full extent and crunched over the longboat. A great cry went up from the whalers as the bull shook the broken boat. Arflane saw his friend flung to the ice in an attempt to crawl away, but now the whale saw him, and its jaws opened again, closing on Bren's body. For a moment the whaling captain's legs kicked, then they too disappeared. Halfling had automatically turned the wheel again to go to the rescue of his friend, but it was too late. Oh, that's what you get, Captain Bren. Yeah, unlucky. You deserve better, big bull whale. You deserve better than to be harpooned to death by Halfling and Urquhart, frankly. But, yeah, it's a bit of a mess. Meanwhile, back at the ranch, Lord Piotr Rosfen's dead. He dictated his will, then died of heart failure while they were out getting smashed about on the whale hunt. He does get a pretty sweet funeral, though. So that's nice. I was going to read some of the funeral, but we've been going an hour and 25 minutes and we're not even halfway through the book. So we're going to rattle to an interesting halfway point, I think, because intrigue abounds. Ross Effney, following his conversation with Arthur, dictated his will, died of heart failure while they were out getting buggered by the whales. Broke-legged Yannick is mega pissed off as the old fellow left the command of the Ice Spirit to Arthurlane, with the additional proviso that on completion of the quest for New York, he will gain full ownership of the vessel, and he left all of his fortune and ships to be divided equally between Manfred and Ulrika, but there's a catch. In order to claim their inheritance, they must accompany Arthurlane on the quest. Janek is doing all right. He's being left in control of the family business. He's independently rich already, and it'll all transfer to the name of Ulson. But he claims he's just worried for his wife going on a dangerous expedition. I suspect he knows that she's got the hots for somebody, potentially. We don't know that, but there does appear to be a little bit of sexual tension in the air. Or is it all in Arthurlane's head? Because it very well could be.
Yeah.
But he was right, because 10 minutes later they are in the sack. There is definitely something slightly askew with some of Moorcock's early writing when it comes to protagonists and women, and probably later. I've been reflecting a bit on this, and since we covered my experiences in the Third World War, we haven't got round to covering Gloriana yet, and that has its own storied history. And the brothel in Rosenstrasse, which I haven't read for a long time, but I had thoughts about at the time, that needs a reread and re-evaluation before I pass any commentary on it, to be honest. But this passage, to cut to the chase, there's this strange bit where where they have tea, and it says he stood over her with legs apart, staring down at her sympathetically. Okay. And this is where we're getting to a critical passage in this book. So we're at this point where he's been standing over her with his legs akimbo, like David Cameron at a Conservative Party conference.
Prince George and Blackadder.
Yeah. And it's a very, very strange passage. And we're going to have to bring up the revisions conversation now. Really, the last page of text in chapter 8. And there's a bit where it says, now Arthurlane breathed rapidly, remembering when he had embraced her on the ice and her breasts were rising and falling also. She flushed, but still she let him grip her hands. I love you, said Arthurlane almost miserably.
With the bit with her breasts, was that part of the text or you're just
No, that was
addition?
part of the text.
Okay, because on mine it's now Arthurlane breathed rapidly, remembering when he had embraced her on the ice. Full stop. She flushed, but still she let him grip her hands.
Right, read to the end of the chapter and then I'll read my version.
Okay. I love you, said Arthurlane almost miserably. Full on Adrian Mole here.
Yeah.
Then she burst into tears, took her hands away and flung herself against him. He held her tightly while she wept, stroking her long, fine hair, kissing her forehead, caressing her shoulders. He felt the tears in his own eyes as he responded to her grief, only barely aware of what he did next. He picked her up in his arms and carried her from the room. The passages were deserted as he took her towards her bedroom, where he still believed he intended to lay her on her bed and let her sleep. He kicked open the door. It was across the corridor from Olsen's, and kicked it shut behind him when he had entered. The room was furnished with chairs, lockers, and a dressing table of softly tinted ivory. White furs were heaped on the wide bed and also lined the walls. He stopped and placed her on the bed, but he did not straighten up. Now he knew that, in spite of the dreadful guilt he felt, he could do nothing to control his actions. He kissed her mouth. Her arms went around his neck as she responded, and he lowered his massive body onto hers, feeling the warmth and the contours of her flesh through the fabric of the dress, feeling her writhe and tremble beneath him like a frightened bird. With one hand he pushed the dress higher, and she tried to stop him, clinging to his hand, but he continued savagely to push through the folds of her clothing until he found her flesh. Then she shuddered under his touch and told him that she was a virgin, that she had never allowed Janet to consummate their marriage. He took her, reddening the white fur of her blood, and then they lay panting side by side, to turn eventually to each other again. And they did it sideways, doggy, and normal. To quote Garth Marenghi's Dark Place.
Yeah, these are fairly similar, but the version in Travelling to Utopia, the more recent version, removes any reference whatsoever of her trying to stop him. It is completely consensual in that version. In this version, it's trimmed the language slightly, but it still reads that with one hand he pushed the dress higher and she tried to stop him, clinging to his hand and moaning. But he continued savagely now to push his hand through the folds of her clothing until he found her flesh and gall. Then she should have such a whimper that she was a virgin, that she'd never, yada, yada, yada. This did not stop him, fiercely he took her, etc., etc. So he scoops her up, takes her to bed, forces himself atop her as she tries to stop him. Okay, first of all, she engages and kisses him, but then he scoops her dress up, sticks his hand down there, she tries to stop him, and he fiercely, checks notes, takes her, reddening the white fur with their blood. Jesus Christ. So, effectively, he rapes her.
Yeah.
So, 20-something 1960s Moorcock, check yourself, mate. Now, as it happens, he did check himself, because in the Gollancz version, Travelling to Utopia here, it reads very differently. He stopped and placed her on the bed, but he did not straighten up. And now he knew that, in spite of the dreadful guilt he felt, for he could do nothing to control his actions. He kissed her mouth. Her arms went around his neck as she responded, and he lowered his massive body onto hers, feeling the warmth and the contours of her flesh through the fabric of her dress, feeling her writhe and tremble beneath him like a frightened bird. She shuddered under his touch and told him she was a virgin, that she had never allowed Yannick to consummate their marriage. Then she reached over to him and kissed him. So the violence of the rape is entirely removed.
I don't know, because you have the kind of the sentence where it says like he's not going to stop. I'm not sure, because it feels more like here it's in my version it's definitely a lot more physical. Where here we have that moment where he's just like, yeah, we're in the Gollancz edition where it feels more like that he knows he's not going to stop, even though the language has been toned down for the physicality of the act. There is still kind of that emotion purpose.
There is the emotional purpose, but there's also she never at any point rejects him or tries to stop him. In fact, she engages with it. It's more palatable. But when I read this, I was like, oh, fuck's sake. So Conrad Arflin, it's not quite Thomas Covenant level.
God, no.
Of wrong, thank God. I suppose in Arflin's defence, his guilt is immediately apparent in the next chapter. It's certainly more in evidence than someone like Thomas Covenant, who, after he rapes a young girl in the first few pages of the first book, he just panics at the thought of getting caught and is relieved when she doesn't tell her dad. That's the extent of his regret in the narrative at that point. It's like, oh, thank fuck she didn't tell her dad, this 14-year-old girl. But the nature of the guilt does bear possibly a little bit of examination in this version, because it says, early in the morning, looking down on her as she slept with a face just visible above the furs and her black hair spread out on the pillow, Arflin felt remorse. No remorse, he knew, would be sufficient to make him part with Ulrika now, but he had broken the law he respected, the law he regarded as just and vital to the existence of his world. This morning he saw himself as a hypocrite, as a deceiver, and as a thief. While he was reconciled to these new roles, the fact that he had assumed them depressed him, and he was further depressed by the knowledge that he had taken advantage of the woman's vulnerability at a time when her own guilt and grief had combined to weaken her moral strength. Oh my God, there's a lot going on in that paragraph, isn't there?
Yep.
Arflin did not regret his actions. He considered regret a useless emotion. What was done, and now he must decide what to do next. Ugh. He sighed as he clothed himself, unwilling to leave her, but aware of what the law would do to her if she were discovered as an adulteress. At worst, she would be exposed on the ice to die. At the very least, both he and she would be ostracised in all the 8 cities. This in itself was effectively a lingering death sentence. So there's no moral quandary about raping the girl, but there is some about the ramifications of her being adulterous and him taking advantage of her, quote, weakened moral state.
So the law never says anything about what it'll do to him. I mean,
it says they'll both be banished to die on the ice.
They'll both be banished, but at no point does it say, oh, and he would end up on the ice.
Yeah,
as well.
or it doesn't say they'll chop his cock off or anything like that. Sadly, it's another indictment of this era of fantasy, isn't it, really? Not only just this era of fantasy, but also Moorcock's ability to write women and understand women's perspectives.
I think this is still like still a problem. Like, did you ever see the TV show Merlin from like a decade or so back?
I was aware of it, but I didn't watch it.
Yeah, for the most part, it's enjoyable fluff. But when it gets to the Guinevere, Lancelot, Arthur moment,
Yeah.
where basically through magic, Lancelot and Guinevere kind of give in. They get caught, and then Lancelot dies because magic reasons. He gets they all think that he killed himself to regain his honor, and Guinevere gets promptly turfed out of town. And at no point does anyone go, "Why it could surely that this was magic that did this. It's always magic that does this in this show." And then was like, nope. This is clearly a crime against Arthur. So we'll kick Guinevere out. She gets forgiven. It's just like, yeah, this is still. It is that thing where it's very much like the sexual politics. It's still a recurring problem even today in a lot of fantasy storytelling, shall we say?
Yeah.
Even if at times they soften the language.
Yeah, I'm just thinking back to that in Excalibur, where the ramifications of Guinevere and Lancelot tapping off is Arthur drives Excalibur into the stone in between them without him waking up. And Lancelot wakes up naked and goes, "The king without a sword, the land without a king," and runs off and grows a killer beard for the next 20 years. Guinevere has to go to be a nun. Guinevere goes to be a nun. Lancelot grows hair and killer beard.
I just always think because of my huge exposure to the Arthurian mythos, which was the comic Camelot 3000, which I read which my mum, in all good faith, took out for me from the library. I think I was about like 11 or 12, and I'm a good 5 years too young for that comic. Where it is very much they all know that they're trapped in this endless cycle, and like even though they don't want to do this again, they can't help who they are, and they all know that they are doomed repeating the same tragedy of Lancelot and Guinevere will give in to their love for each other, and Arthur this time around has to kind of stand there and watch it happen.
Yeah, well, going back to Moorcock's inability to write women, there's no real complications for her feelings as a character at this point. There are some a little bit further. She comes across as all in on Arthur now. She says, "I am yours. I am rightfully yours, despite my marriage vows." And then because he's troubled by everything, he mutters something and off he goes into the corridor, troubled. So one awkward breakfast later, the worst he suffers the following morning is an awkward breakfast. Arthur and Manfred view maps and plan the expedition to New York, but Yannick interrupts and gets all shitty about everything, even threatening to void the will, declaring that the old man must have been mad to bring a common sailor into his will. Doesn't fly though. Manfred's pretty good, pretty manipulative. And ultimately, though, he commits to joining the expedition to accompany his wife. But things only get worse with Arthur when he approaches Ulrika, and she gets cold and gives him a fuck-off pill, saying that the events of the night before need to be forgotten, and he responds with anger and overbearing behaviour like a massive, desperate, adolescent little cunt. But narratively, he stoically decides he must abide by her wishes. Now, I've got to say, up until this chapter, I absolutely love this book, and now I can only say I've got a complicated relationship with it.
Yeah,
that's all I can say, really.
I mean, Moorcock and gender politics gets strange at times. Be it say the Ice Schooner or the willing incest of the Cornelius siblings.
Yeah. I mean, Elric was shagging his cousin. He only ramped that up in the final program, didn't he?
I mean, okay, with Elric there is the excuse of this is what decadent monarchies get up to all the time. Look at the British royal family. They always seem overjoyed when some fresh genetics come in. Yeah,
well, unless, of course, they're of colour. Then, it all goes horribly wrong. But yeah, Arthur Lane is that classic 60s Mike protagonist, competent, stoic, powerful, a complete fucking duffer with the ladies. Maybe takes it one step further in this, but in Mike's defence, when it comes to his revisionism, he listens and he observes and he takes action. And he's changed things for later volumes, just like he did with Gloriana when Andrea Dworkin privately said to him, "You know what, mate? the end of this book is bollocks. and he, to be fair, he listened to her and he changed it. I think I've commented on a previous podcast. My cousin Emily, who games with us, I was getting them into Moorcock, and she read some Coram and some other bits and pieces, and I got her a really nice copy of Gloriana for her birthday, and I hadn't read it for 30 years. Oh. And she said, it was really good. It was really interesting. I like all the detail, and in many ways, it's a really interesting read. But the end, I was like, oh, I forgot about that. Yeah, and she read the end that wasn't as bad. But anyways, complete duff with the ladies. Unlike most of the protagonists, he's now sulking because here the lassie forced himself on work come and hang out with him and forgive him and be his best mate. So he spends another chapter sulking, making his crew's life miserable, self-sabotaging, delaying, generally being a nasty prick to his men, even having them flogged for trivial failures.
Is this the only kind of real Moorcock protagonist who isn't a slightly effete kind of scholar who is forced into a life of violence and chaos?
Well, we don't really know what Hawkmoon was into when he was a young man. Yeah. But he did end up responding to the sack of his city by becoming a mercenary for the Grand Britannians and carrying out horrific war crimes until he got his opportunity to turn on them. So he's a little bit different. Elric, all Elric wanted to do was ride into the hills with Cimmeril and look at weird flowers and discuss poisonous thorns. Coram just wanted to spend time in one of his many gymnasia composing things.
I think Conrad Arflane might be one of the few Mike genre protagonists who is very much kind of like a working class coder.
Working dude, yeah. Yeah, he's absolutely a working man, isn't he? Yeah, so that is it's quite different. But is it even more disturbing that Mike's only working class character is a rapist in the earliest versions of this book? That's quite annoying, isn't it?
I would like to say no, but because there is still that interiority of Conrad, compared to say maybe Elric or Coram. But there isn't the ability to the ability to intellectually express it. So there is that interiority, but the only way he knows how to respond is through just being more of a hard, a burly hard ass.
Yeah.
Then say going into a long Elric monologue of how everything is terrible and how he's terrible and how he wants to die. And Conrad's like, that man, whip him.
Where's a bloody big land whale when you need one? Yeah. But, yeah, there's a big element of this kind of fiction, particularly the time of the fiction. Of course, it's quite easy for us to glibly say that this character is a rapist, but when Mike framed this in 1966, that wouldn't have legally been rape, probably, because society was so fucking backwards in so many ways when it came to women's bodies.
It is. We are talking about this 1960s sci-fi serial from 2025 terms, and even 2025 is still different from say 2015, and in God, how different it was from when I was a teenager in the 90s.
Yeah,
the conversation changes, and sometimes you have to remember that these were the time that these books are always products of their time. It's like Heinlein. I've tried to read Heinlein so much, but his books are so are written in such a 1950s style. It is literally reading something written by a space alien.
There's a big element of this kind of fiction where fantasy heroes are men of burning passions, isn't there? Like Conan, and you get these problematic elements. You always get these problematic elements. But he was writing Conan in the 30s.
You can take a lot of these elements and turn them into a 90s bodice ripper.
Yeah.
Into something similar like Outlander, or just one of those books which just has Fabio on the cover, all bronzed, and those kind of book covers would have it all kind of a little bit bumped out to kind of give the cover more prominence on the shelf. I don't know what that's called.
Yeah,
it's and you still have these in kind of these elements in kind of romance novels even now. It's
perfectly possible that a woman could listen to this who reads Bodice Rippers and think, what the fuck are you two clutching your pearls for?
Because because that's the thing. Because if this had been written, are we only giving Mike this kind of flack because he's a man? And if this was written by a woman, would we be saying the exact same things?
If this was written by a woman, I'd be thinking, well, everybody's got the kinks.
Everyone has their kinks, and it's.
I would not want to kink shame anybody.
And it's like when we're talking about God help us gore.
Yeah. Oh fuck, Jesus Christ. I don't know. Again, there's a big element to this fiction where fantasy heroes are these men of burning passions, but this is through the Moorcockian lens of that teen-like angst that informed Elric, but made harder to read or enjoy or identify with a protagonist because of this for me. Yeah. If you do identify with this protagonist, well, I've got news for you. But it's an odd choice narratively, and he wouldn't have done it just a scant 10 years later because he changed the text, And 10 years after that, he changed the text considerably. Is it because he thought he didn't want to be offensive, or is it because he thought, you know what, I was a bit out of order there?
Yeah.
Hard to tell. You'd have to ask Mike, I suppose.
It's like, this is... How old would he have been when he wrote this?
Well, he wrote it in 1966, and was he born in 1942 or something? 1941? So he's only 25.
Yeah. It's like, God, you know nothing at 25.
Yeah.
You think you do. Yeah. I remember at 25, I remember what I was like at 25, and just like, oh, you innocent idiot.
Well, I remember what I was like at 25, and to be honest, some elements of it weren't that pretty in terms of attitudes. I'm sorry to say, but I would like to think that my self-awareness over the years and listening to people and being a relatively decent person has enabled me to grow a little bit.
Yeah, I think.
And I think that's what we should all try and do, isn't it?
Yeah. The important thing is that when your friends, tell you, hey, we have some issues, we have some thoughts. They're your friends. They're hopefully doing it out of a place of good intentions, because more than likely they want to still keep being your friend, but they just want you to know, hey, this is kind of where you're being an a-hole. Yeah. And I've had several friends who have called me out to my a-holeness, and it's you change or you decay.
Yeah, that's right. It's entropy versus growth, isn't it, at the end of the day? So, which is much like what the core of this story is. So there was a Grafton edition published after 77 that I thought I had, but I couldn't find it. I think I might have shipped it out to a patron demon when I was slimming down on the spurs. So I was going to ask if anybody had that edition, let us know, answers on a postcard, but the version you've got, I think, must have those revisions. So we've now, between us, got 3 different versions of that passage. Yeah,
that's typical for Moorcock after a while.
It is really, but one thing we can say for him is he showed that growth, and he developed, and he listened, and he paid attention. Yeah. So, that's all we can ask for, isn't it? But
and then also, is just like, that Conrad is the protagonist of the story. Doesn't mean he has to be the morally upstanding hero, because you have, say, like a Conan who can be seen, can be framed definitely in the film.
Yeah.
In the Schwarzenegger film, or stuff like Mark Lawrence's Prince of Thorns, where the main character is just like an unlikable shit.
I'm not approaching Thomas Covenant levels of hatred for the protagonist here, so that's all right. It's not like I remember the Thomas Covenant books. Remember reading at the time, read them when I was at school, enjoyed them. Funny enough, I read them because my auntie was reading them and she recommended them to me. So there's that thing about clutching your pearls on the behalf of women. And it was my auntie, who must have been in her late 30s at the time, who actually recommended these books to me in the first place. And then I recommended to my sister, and she nearly threw it at me. She read the first 20 pages and nearly threw it at me. Said, "What the fuck did you recommend this to me for?" So yes, horses for courses, isn't it, at the end of the day? But I rebought those books in really, really nice hardcovers from a charity shop a few years ago. Really beautiful hardcovers with really nice illustrated dust jackets. And I couldn't get 3 chapters into it before I gave up and just took them back to charity shop.
I read the first trilogy in like my early 20s.
Yeah.
And I've tried to reread them, that first book. And it is also, Thomas Covenant is such a passive protagonist that it sometimes really is difficult to read a book where the main character is just standing there, basically, putting his hands in front of his eyes going, la 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 la, this isn't real. While everyone else is actually doing the important shit, and then you just have him feeling really guilty about everything. It's
Yeah.
It's also, it's, very much like an intention, of course there's also, how much of, because the rape in the Thomas Covenant is kind of what the entire first trilogy revolves around in its own way, because you see the ramifications of his actions going further and further as he keeps coming back to the land. How much of that is just that intentional, okay, this is the part where we break the character and the story.
Yeah.
And this is what everything he's going to have to grow beyond initially begins with. And then how much of this is with a serial wanting to have like that big cliffhanger climactic soap opera moment. You almost have that chapter end with the ending beats of EastEnders going bum 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 bum.
Yeah. But, ultimately, Arthland does finally lighten up as the do set sail. And, well, what will happen on quest mode? We'll find out in part 2. Oh, Miles. We've done nearly 2 hours. We've not even got to the quest.
God, I think for part 2, I'm gonna need to buy like a big pack of halls.
You are. If there's any more Arthland dialogue, you're gonna need some. Definitely gonna need some links. So you're gonna have to cut that throat. Lots of honey and hot lemon.
God, that's how I know. That's how I know I'm getting old, because I could do that. I used to be able to do that voice in my 20s. I could do voices that deep and not feel anything for minutes on end. And it's like 30 seconds. Like, God, why did I do this? I want to die.
Yeah, this is all part of getting old, mate. I used to be able to do gravelly voices for days. Yeah, no longer.
Look, I'll take it. My knees still work. My back isn't killing me, so I'll take that.
That's fair. That's a good position to be in. Well, mate, great to see you as always. And we will pick up the Ice Schooner Part 2. Hopefully, not before the end of the millennium. Oh no, we've already ended the millennium. Not before the waters freeze over and New York disappears under a shit ton of ice. But enjoy the rest of your Sunday.
I will. Hopefully, when we get back round to part 2, I might have endured a land of ice and snow myself as I go into a Wisconsin, which is very big on its heavy on its winter. Wisconsin winters, they've not been as long as they used to be since I moved here.
Yeah.
But they do go on. They get cold, they get icy, they get snow. And I usually walk to work, and that makes it fun. And I always feel sorry for some poor bastard who was just hearing me singing I'm Walking Backwards for Christmas by the Goons as I'm trawling through the snow and thinking, I'm staying well away from him.
Great to talk to you. Catch you next time.
As always, have a good evening.
Many thanks to Miles for joining me once again in Derry Toms. And don't forget, the Casual Trek podcast is available on all the usual podcatchers. We'll get back to the Ice Schooner in the new year, and we have more 60s Moorcock coming up next time out too, when we shall visit the City of the Beast. But in the meantime, thanks as ever to our patrons. First, those without tier, Anthony Piconti, Tim Cardos, Dave Dempster, and Sebastian Weetabix. And to our Chaos engineers, Ed von Stott, Andrew Clark, Andrew Cicluna, Andrew Spong, Andrew Van Ness, Anthony Porter, Benjamin Fletcher, Ben Hagar, Brandon Mays, Dan Charnley, Dave F., Dave Griffiths, Dave Voxman, Gabriel Laycock, Harvey Faulkner Aston, Jim Kirkland, Jim Jupp, John W. Lays, Jules Lawrence, Mal Pertwee, Matt Saltz, Michael Hopwood, Nick Hopkinson, Paul McRandall, PJ Cooper, Rex Osseous Nusquam, Scott Butler, Simon Perrins, and Steve Braun. And of course, thanks to our crafty Jugaderos, Adrian Tchaikovsky, Alexander Harris, Chris Sharp, Christian Hundal, James Connell, Graham Holden, Kevin Williams, Liam Turner, Loz, Mark Buckley, Mark Hewlett, Mark Taylor, Matthew Broom, Murray Palmer, Urfa Ziv, Sean Twist, Toby White, and Taylor Lavery. And eternal thanks to our patron demons, Action Edmonds, Alistair Davison, Andy Darby, Brian Henderson, David Lee, Derek Clunan, Fred Quiche, Gareth Wilson, Glenn Sawyer, Greg Faulkner, Gwen Barlow, Ian Stead, Jenny Stim, Jason Vogel, Joachim Sund, Joe Monty, Johan Hiapa, Jonathan Sharp, Lee Gary, Liam Jones, Marius Latauskas, Mark Hebden, Miles Reed-Labato, Neil Burton, Paul Hillary, Randall Gatlin, Steve Round, Tom Murphy, Tony Malazzo, the OG patron Norman Beresford, and last but never least, Robert McMillan. That's enough from me. Follow us on Instagram and Blue Sky at the handle @Breakfast Ruins. Email us at breakfastruins@outlook.com. The webpage is breakfastintheruins.com. We have our Patreon page too, of course, and there are a few extra odds and sods on there. But until next time, wherever you are in the world, whatever's going on your turf, take care, stay safe, and we will meet again soon on the Moonbeam Roads.